At 6:00 a.m. on the morning of June 4th, 1942, near Midway Atoll, Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stands on the flag bridge of his flagship carrier, watching the first wave of Japanese aircraft launch into the air. The strike force is executing a plan built to look unstoppable: 4 fleet carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and crews trained through months of hard combat across the Pacific. Nagumo's job is to deliver the opening blows and then hold his carriers ready for whatever comes next. The Japanese operation is the work of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet. His intent is to draw the U.S. Navy into a decisive battle by threatening Midway, forcing American carriers to rush in and be destroyed. It is complex, multi-layered, and spread across hundreds of miles of ocean. Yamamoto believes complexity will protect him because it gives the Americans too many problems to solve at once. But complexity is also a weakness. If even one part slips out of sequence, the whole design starts to fray. In the air, the first Japanese strike heads toward Midway's airfields and defenses. It carries the confidence of the early Pacific War, a belief that speed, surprise, and professional execution will break resistance before the enemy can respond. Yet Midway is not caught blind. American commanders have prepared for this moment. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance is already at sea with U.S. carriers, operating under a clear directive: find Nagumo's carriers and hit them first. That American clarity exists for one reason: intelligence. In Honolulu, code breakers led by Commander Joseph Rochefort have been reading enough Japanese naval traffic to understand the outline of the operation. The United States cannot see everything, but it knows enough: where the Japanese carriers are expected, what they are targeting, and roughly when the strike will come. This advantage is quiet, technical, and unseen by the Japanese crews preparing their weapons and fuel, but it is already shaping the battle before a single bomb falls. As Japanese aircraft reach Midway and attack, the island fights back with everything it has: fighters, anti-aircraft guns, and hurried launches of torpedo bombers and level bombers. Many American planes are outdated, and their attacks are disorganized. They take heavy losses and achieve little, but they accomplish something important. They force the Japanese carriers to stay alert, to keep maneuvering, and to keep cycling aircraft through fragile routines of landing, fueling, and rearming. Nagumo now faces the first critical decision point of the day. His aircraft returning from Midway reports the base is damaged but not neutralized. That means a second strike may be required. At the same time, he knows American carriers could be somewhere nearby. Carrier warfare demands speed, but it also demands accurate information. Nagumo has neither. His scouting effort is incomplete, and some search aircraft are launched late. Every missing report leaves the Japanese command operating inside uncertainty. This is where doctrine tightens into a trap. The Japanese carrier force has been trained to mass its striking power, launch in coordinated waves, and avoid wasting aircraft on partial attacks. That discipline creates devastating results when the enemy is located cleanly, but it becomes dangerous when the situation changes faster than the command system can process. A carrier deck is not a stable platform. It is a moving factory filled with fuel, explosives, and aircraft that cannot easily be scattered or protected. As Nagumo's staff debates whether to prepare for a second attack on Midway or hold aircraft for an anti-ship strike, a delayed scouting report begins to filter in. An American force may have been sighted. The report is unclear. It lacks details. It is the type of message that can either be dismissed or treated as an emergency, and the entire fate of the strike force depends on which interpretation wins. If Chuichi Nagumo had launched immediately on that first uncertain contact report, would his carriers have struck before American dive bombers arrived overhead? In the minutes that follow, the Japanese carriers continue working at maximum tempo, recovering aircraft, shifting weapons loads, and trying to keep the deck cycle moving. Every decision creates commitments that cannot be undone quickly, and as Nagumo tries to keep control, the one thing he cannot do is stop time, because in the sky, American carrier aircraft are already inbound. On Nagumo's carriers, crews work at a pace that leaves no room for hesitation. Aircraft that have returned from striking Midway are being recovered and serviced. Fuel hoses are moved across the hangar deck. Bomb carts and torpedoes are hauled into position. Mechanics, armorers, and deck officers operate on signals and practice routines, trying to keep the flight deck clear enough to launch again. These ships are the core of Japan's offensive power, but at this moment they are also crowded, vulnerable machines. Nagumo is caught between two competing demands. Midway is still capable of fighting, and leaving it active risks more attacks on his carriers. But the larger danger is the American carrier force he suspects is nearby. Japanese doctrine emphasizes destroying enemy carriers first, yet it also demands a clean, organized strike, one that hits with maximum weight, not scattered effort. Nagumo's staff begins shifting his reserve aircraft from anti-ship torpedoes to bombs suited for attacking land targets, preparing for a second strike on the island. Then comes the report that changes everything. A scout plane radio message indicates American ships have been sighted. At first, it is incomplete, and then it becomes worse. A follow-up suggests carriers may be among them. That single word, carrier, means the battle has arrived. Nagumo orders another change in armament, shifting aircraft back to anti-ship weapons. In practical terms, this is not simply a command decision. It is labor, time, and physical movement inside a ship designed for speed but limited by space. Weapons must be moved, attached, armed, and staged. Aircraft must be reconfigured and prepared for launch. Every step adds minutes. This is the central operational mistake that Midway punishes. The Japanese command is not indecisive because it lacks courage. It is trapped because the carrier system requires commitment. Once aircraft are armed and arranged, changing the plan takes time and exposes the ship to the most dangerous condition possible. Aircraft crowded below decks, fueled, and loaded with munitions. It is the precise moment when a single bomb hit can cause far more than structural damage. It can produce chain explosions that cannot be contained. At sea, Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance makes the opposite kind of choice. With intelligence pointing him toward Nagumo's carriers, Spruance orders his aircraft launched quickly, even though the American formations are not perfectly coordinated. It is an aggressive use of time. It accepts disorder as the price of striking first. That decision reflects a mature understanding of carrier warfare. In 1942, the first effective hit often decides the outcome because a burning flight deck ends the ability to launch aircraft at all. American torpedo squadrons arrive first. Their planes fly low and slow, vulnerable to fighters and anti-aircraft fire. They are met by Japanese combat air patrol, directed with skill and violence. Many U.S. torpedo bombers are shot down. Few reach effective firing range. The losses are severe and immediate. The attack, by itself, fails. But it still changes the battle. Japanese fighters descend to low altitude to kill the torpedo planes. The carriers turn and maneuver at high speed to avoid torpedoes. The combat air patrol becomes separated and scattered, focused on threats near the surface. For Nagumo, this is an exhausting kind of defense: constant evasive action, constant pressure, and constant uncertainty. His deck crews are still trying to prepare the next strike, and now they are doing it under the strain of repeated alarms and violent maneuvers. This is where tactical bravery intersects with operational effect. The American torpedo squadrons are being destroyed, but they are also pulling Japanese attention downward. The Japanese carriers are surviving moment by moment, but they are spending their precious minutes reacting instead of resetting. The delay that began with weapon swaps is now compounded by defense, confusion, and incomplete situational awareness. Nagumo's ability to see the whole fight is also weakened by the structure of command. Reports come in through multiple channels. They are delayed, partial, or contradictory. In modern terms, the Japanese have a problem of information flow too slow for the speed of aircraft. The Japanese Navy is designed for decisive engagements, but Midway is not a controlled duel. It is a fast-moving collision of mistakes, guesses, and sudden opportunities. As the Japanese carriers fight off another wave of attacks, Nagumo is still trying to regain the initiative. He needs one clean moment, one uninterrupted deck cycle, to launch a full strike that can find and destroy the American carriers. If he can launch first, he can still win the battle. If he cannot, the advantage he brought to Midway will collapse in a single strike. What if Isoroku Yamamoto had ordered Nagumo to launch a partial strike the moment enemy carriers were suspected, rather than waiting for a perfectly assembled blow? Above Nagumo's ships, there is a brief period with no American aircraft in view. The carriers continue their deck work, unaware that U.S. dive bombers are already approaching from altitude and will be overhead within minutes. American dive bombers arrive over the Japanese carrier force with almost no warning. They have been searching across the open ocean, burning fuel, navigating by estimation and fragments of contact reports. When they finally locate the carriers, the timing is exact and lethal. Below them, the Japanese decks are crowded with activity, aircraft being refueled, weapons being moved, and crews trying to recover control of a battle that has become chaotic faster than the command system can follow. The first bombs strike with immediate consequences. One hit does not simply tear steel, it ignites the carrier's internal vulnerability. On ships built around aviation, fuel and munitions are everywhere. Hangar decks hold armed aircraft, gasoline lines run through compartments, fire spreads inside enclosed spaces, and damage control teams cannot always reach the worst areas. On the carriers that are hit, the first explosions trigger others. The heat and smoke force crews back. Aircraft that cannot be launched or pushed overboard become burning obstacles that multiply the disaster. 3 carriers are crippled in rapid succession. The sequence is not slow, and it is not a gradual breakdown. It is a sudden removal of combat power that takes years to build and minutes to destroy. The carrier's ability to fight is stripped away as flight decks become unusable and hangar decks become infernos. Even a carrier that remains afloat is functionally dead if it cannot launch aircraft. For the Japanese Navy, which has depended on carrier aviation to create strategic surprise, this is an operational collapse happening in real time. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo is forced to face the moment every commander fears, when training and control no longer match the violence of events. Orders are sent, but the ships are breaking apart under internal fire. Communications become fragmented. Crews are fighting for survival, not maneuvering for advantage. A carrier is not a simple warship in combat. It is a floating airbase. When the airbase is burning, there is no replacement plan that can be improvised on the spot. The Japanese combat air patrol, so effective moments earlier against American torpedo aircraft, is now in the wrong place, at the wrong altitude, with fuel and ammunition already spent. Fighter direction struggles to recover. Even if pilots climb to meet the dive bombers, they arrive too late. Carrier battle is not like surface battle, where a ship can absorb hits and continue firing. For carriers, one successful attack can end the fight immediately. This is not only a tactical surprise, it is the result of structural misunderstandings. The Japanese High Command underestimated American readiness and overestimated the protection offered by distance and complexity. They also relied on scouting that did not deliver timely clarity. The result is that Nagumo's carriers are caught during the worst possible moment: aircraft in transition, bombs and torpedoes being moved, and decks not cleared for launch. Midway punishes that vulnerability with precision. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance's aircraft do not need perfect coordination once they arrive. They need only to hit, and they do. For American air crews, the sight of multiple carriers beneath them is the kind of target that can erase fear for a few seconds and replace it with urgency. Their task is simple: put bombs onto flight decks and into hangars. When they succeed, the Japanese force begins to lose the ability to fight as an organized unit. As the morning continues, the 4th carrier is found and attacked. The remaining Japanese aviation strength tries to respond, but it is now operating without the full system that carrier warfare requires. The air groups have lost leadership, coordination, and deck support. Even surviving aircraft are limited by fuel, by missing communications, and by a shattered launching cycle. The Japanese Navy had built its early war power around elite pilots and carefully trained deck crews. In one morning, that corps is burning, drowning, or abandoning ship. The human cost is immediate and personal. Sailors struggle to control fires that cannot be controlled. Damage control teams work in smoke-filled compartments with failing equipment. Pilots returning from missions search for carriers that are no longer there. Men trained for attack now face the simplest and hardest duty: keeping the ship alive long enough to save as many lives as possible. This is the moment when the battle shifts from tactical contest to irreversible loss. Japan can still fight the war. It can still deploy ships, aircraft, and men. But it cannot replace what is being destroyed here with speed. The loss of 4 fleet carriers is not only a number, it is a collapse of trained crews, experienced pilots, and an offensive system built on precision. If Raymond Spruance had delayed his strike to form a tighter, more coordinated attack, would Nagumo's carriers have launched first and changed the outcome? By midday, the surface of the Pacific is filled with wreckage, smoke, and scattered survivors. The Japanese carrier force is no longer an instrument of decisive victory. It is a withdrawal under pressure, trying to understand how its strongest weapon vanished so quickly. The surviving Japanese ships pull away from the Midway area under strict radio discipline, trying to reduce the chance of further American attacks. On the bridges and in the operations rooms, officers work with fragments, partial damage reports, incomplete aircraft rosters, and the hard arithmetic of losses that cannot be disguised. For hours, the full scale of the disaster is not even fully understood inside the Japanese fleet. The carriers are gone, but their aviation elements are still scattered. Some aircraft are missing, some are returning to nowhere, and some are trying to find any deck that can take them. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto is not positioned with the carriers. His command is spread across distant forces, following a plan that assumes coordination will hold. Now, he receives reports that strike at the core of what the Japanese Navy has built its strategy upon. 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, have been destroyed or fatally damaged. With them go many of Japan's most experienced carrier pilots and the deck crews who made the system work. Yamamoto understands immediately that this is not a simple defeat. It is the rapid loss of a specialized force that cannot be rebuilt quickly, no matter how many ships remain in the fleet. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo is still alive, still in command, and still trying to keep order amid wreckage and retreat. His outward duty is to preserve what remains and to report the facts, but the personal burden is unavoidable. The Japanese carrier force was expected to dominate the Central Pacific. Instead, it has been dismantled in a single morning. Nagumo's decisions, his weapon changes, his delays, and his inability to launch a decisive strike first will become the center of later scrutiny. Yet the reality is larger than one man. The system that produced Japanese victories early in the war also produced a rigid approach to uncertainty. Midway punishes that rigidity without mercy. Inside Japan's high command, the first problem is not morale, it is information control. Defeats can fracture confidence at home and inside the fleet. In 1942, the Japanese state is built on certainty and sacrifice, not on transparent accounting. The messages that move upward toward Tokyo are shaped to preserve authority and unity. Early reporting understates the scale of loss and emphasizes the damage done to the enemy. This is not only propaganda, it is the reflex of a military culture that believes admitting full disaster too quickly can break discipline and invite panic. The Japanese Navy also faces a harsh operational reality. There is no immediate counterstroke available. The remaining ships cannot quickly locate and destroy the American carriers without the very carrier strength that has just been lost. Yamamoto considers follow-on actions, including pursuing the American fleet, but the window is closing. Fuel, distance, and uncertainty all press against aggressive movement. The battle has created the opposite of a decisive engagement. It has created a situation where further action carries risk without the promise of control. This is where the historian's analysis becomes clear. Yamamoto's plan depended on layered forces and synchronized movement, but in carrier warfare, the center of gravity is the flight deck. It cannot be protected by distant ships if the air search fails and the carrier force is caught in transition. Japan entered Midway believing it could dictate terms. The United States entered Midway prepared to accept confusion as long as it got one clean chance to strike. That difference in approach matters as much as aircraft numbers or ship tonnage. As the fleet withdraws, the internal language of command becomes restrained and controlled. It is framed in operational terms: carriers lost, air groups depleted, the mission no longer feasible. But behind those words is the recognition that a limit has been reached. Japan can still fight, but it has less margin for error now than at any point since Pearl Harbor. A single morning has changed the shape of the war. What if Isoroku Yamamoto had abandoned operational silence and ordered an immediate, aggressive search and destroy pursuit of Spruance's carriers, even at the risk of further losses? The Japanese High Command cannot undo Midway with explanation. It can only endure it, reorganize what remains, and prepare for the next phase, one in which the United States will now choose the place and time of the next fight. The Japanese fleet disengages and heads west, carrying survivors, wounded men, and the remnants of a plan that no longer exists. The withdrawal is organized, but the shock is visible in how the fleet behaves afterward: tighter security, reduced radio traffic, and a sharper awareness that American carriers are now the central threat. Japan has not lost the ability to fight, but it has lost the ability to dominate through sudden carrier strikes in the way it had done across the first half year of the war. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto returns to a strategic reality he had feared since before Pearl Harbor. He had never believed Japan could win a long war of production against the United States. His hope was to deliver early decisive blows that would break American will or force negotiations. Midway does the opposite. It gives the United States proof that Japan's carrier force can be beaten, and it shows American commanders that calculated risk can produce results even against an opponent with elite training and battlefield experience. For Japan, the loss is not simply the carriers themselves, it is the trained aviators who cannot be replaced quickly. A fleet carrier is a hull, steel, and engines. A carrier air group is the living system that makes it lethal. Japan's pre-war aviation training produced highly skilled pilots, but it also produced them slowly, and the war had already taken a heavy toll in the months leading up to Midway. Midway accelerates the loss of that experienced corps. Replacements will come, but they will not match the same standard of training, coordination, and instinct under pressure. For the United States, Midway creates an opening that had not existed before. Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance leaves the battle knowing he has done enough, and also knowing how close the outcome came to turning the other way. American losses are serious, especially among the torpedo squadrons that were nearly annihilated, but the U.S. carrier force survives with its strike power intact. That matters more than a tally of aircraft lost. The U.S. Navy can now continue offensive operations, not just defend. This is the point where initiative begins to shift. In the months that follow, the consequences become operational. Japan must defend a wider perimeter with fewer effective carriers and fewer elite crews. The United States, while still rebuilding after earlier defeats, now has confidence in its carrier doctrine and its ability to coordinate air search, strikes, and damage control. American commanders learn that the enemy can be forced into mistakes through pressure and tempo. They also learn that aircraft carriers are not simply weapons, they are time-sensitive systems that can collapse instantly when caught at the wrong moment. This is why Midway is not a single event with a clean ending. It shapes what comes next. When the United States moves into the Solomon Islands and fights for Guadalcanal, Japan is still dangerous and still capable of fierce tactical resistance. But it no longer has the same ability to deliver one decisive carrier blow and then retreat behind an untouchable shield. Each engagement after Midway becomes more costly, each loss becomes harder to replace. The war becomes a grinding contest of attrition, logistics, and repeated strain on men who are already exhausted. There is also an internal consequence inside Japan's command culture. After Midway, the language of certainty becomes harder to sustain. The Navy cannot openly admit the full scale of the disaster to the public, but inside operational planning circles, the reality is understood. Japan must fight with less room for error, and it must fight against a growing American industrial output that will not slow down. The High Command can still demand sacrifice, but it cannot guarantee that sacrifice will lead to victory. Midway's significance is often described through ships and aircraft, but its deepest impact lies in something simpler. It changes what each side believes is possible. For American crews, it proves the enemy can be found and struck. For Japanese crews, it proves the carrier force can be shattered in hours. And once that belief changes, strategy changes with it. By the time the smoke clears from Midway, the battle has already reached beyond the wreckage. It has reshaped decisions that will send more men into combat, more ships into the Pacific, and more nations into a war that will not be decided quickly. Japan will fight on with courage and discipline, but the balance has begun to turn, and it will not turn back.